what I thought I'd do today, I think there's so much been talked about corporate governance, of process, procedures, sustainability, that I would try and confine myself to my personal experience on audit committees that I've had over the last 4 or 5 years, and what really concerns me. And this ranges right across the spectrum. But I want to start with a quotation which I love starting with. It's from Seneca. If you do not know to which port you are sailing, no wind is favorable. So we need to really be very clear how we're moving forward, and very much so in our personal lives, but also in corporate lives. What worries me today is the dynamic context in which companies operate and countries operate. Let me look at 4 or 5 issues broadly that are impacting us all on a continuous time frame, minute by minute, at a speed which is unbelievable. We've never experienced this before. There are major economic and societal transformations taking place. The financial crisis that we had has been papered over. Quantitative easing was one way of obviating or mitigating some of the immediate impact, but that has created huge fiscal impacts, which we have to deal with today. So the economic crisis that we are facing, Europe, the United States, and China eventually, is real and is happening constantly. Societies, Arab Spring, the great protest on corruption in India. There are huge societal movements now that are happening. There are tectonic shifts in the balance of power in the last 10 years, of economic power. All of the world's foreign exchange resources today are in the East. The West are debtor nations. So the whole thing has shifted. The cloud, which is organization, information, transparency, social networking, WikiLeaks, are all having major impacts on what is happening. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Just say flip.
Okay.
And they'll flip it for
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Sorry for this.
No problem. There's a whole issue of global convergence, of corporate governance, of accounting standards, of ways of control. It's happening gradually, but it's happening. We've suddenly realized what the costs of economic growth really are, and I think Mervyn King was really talking about this whole issue of sustainability. But people were talking about the costs of economic growth 20, 30 years ago, but they didn't have much of a hearing. So let me just come back to how is this all going to impact corporate lives, audit committees, risk assessments? How are we going to do them? Because the world external environment is changing at a speed which is hard to digest. I have 4 slides basically, and I want to, could you flip? Independence of the board, I think would be an extremely important element of everything we're talking about on governance. Now, independence in terms not of related parties and fit and proper, but in terms of independence of mind. There are far too many boards today who really are worried about independent directors, totally independent directors. And it's very much there. There's also an issue of duration on the board. At what point do you become an insider, where the incentives are really to go with the flow? Independent chairman of the board. The board needs to be controlled and managed by an independent chairman. It should not be the MD and the CEO. It's now slowly gaining greater currency. But a lot of our banks in India, for example, are chairman MD run boards. There are lots of companies which have chairman and MDs that actually determine what goes to the board. And if a CEO and an MD can determine what information goes to the board or doesn't go to the board, it limits the independence of the board. And to my mind, this is an extremely important criteria. We need fiercely independent nomination committees with a very strong independent board member that chairs it, an independent board member that chairs it. We cannot fill our boardrooms with cronies, old boys, friends. All of this has to change. So in a sense, independence really is about selection of people, the CEO and the board, because that determines the culture of the organization. That determines how that company is going to move forward. The next slide, flip, is on insight. If the world is changing, and if all of this thing is happening, we are facing constant change. Business in the context of domestic and global trends is going to be very critical. You need people who can assess this, who have a feel for what's going on. It is not one of compliance, just of compliance. It's somebody who has a feel, or she has a feel, of what is really happening in that business, both domestically and globally. How would we identify risks in this concept? How do we predict the future? And it's more important to predict the future than ever before. Peter Drucker once said, the future's already happened. So one could really predict it. What he really meant was the underlying conditions for what is going to happen are already in place. One has to go and read those underlying conditions. If you don't read them, you lose out. So in a sense, you need capacities, people who are looking at underlying trends, who are really looking at what is going on. Innovation and mitigation. How are we going to mitigate risks, and what sort of innovation can we bring forward which are proactive in dealing with it? Old methods are not going to work anymore. More dramatic methods are going to be needed. We have to internalize externalities. The externalities that are being impinged on the company, we'll have to internalize those that we can and manage them. And the quality and background of audit committee members are extremely crucial if you're going to have any sense of what I'm talking about. And that is where independence really comes in. So I think that seems to be one of the major issues in terms of the human intellectual resources to manage the problem. Redefining the role of the audit committee. I've always said audit committees are about three things. What are the systems in place? What is the process in place? And what is the discipline in place to run those systems and processes? I think auditors are always having that problem. And I always raise this issue. Have we got the right system? Have we got the right process? Have we got the right amount of discipline in terms of management? There are changing standards. So again, this is very important. IFRS is becoming much more, it's sort of converging towards IFRS. The notions of fair valuation are changing. Who are these valuers going to be? How are you going to value? This whole range of skills that are going to change. What worries me also on audit committees are related party transactions. How do we track related party transactions? That they're arm's length. How do we look at transfer pricing? Major issues. What are the principles we used for these elements? And how often do audit committees really go through related party transactions? If you really look at it, a lot of our problems have arisen because we weren't looking at related party transactions closely enough. The other problem I have, at least in companies with lots of subsidiaries, when a company has a lot of subsidiaries and companies, the complexity increases. I get suspicious. Why do you need all these companies? Are you placing profits here and taking losses somewhere and you're pulling it all together? You've got to be able to look at that. But effective audit of subsidiaries, because the veracity of the consolidated accounts depends on your being comfortable with the subsidiaries. And a number of audit committees that I sit on have huge number of subsidiaries. How do you deal with them? And they're being audited by some other auditor. This auditor will make a disclaimer and say, well, it's been audited by somebody else. We've obviously had a look at it, but it's their problem. So we really do have an issue on subsidiary. Now, for example, in Tata Motors, our subsidiary, Jaguar Land Rover, is larger than us, right? So there are real issues in how you deal with that. And now another element that's come in, which is extremely important, at least for audit committees to look at, is health and safety. Safety and health within the enterprise is an extremely important element. And this is something we're looking at as well. Now, to health and safety, I would add security, because we are often operating in very difficult environments, and therefore security becomes very crucial. Okay, my time is up, so let me just 2 slides and I'm through. Last slide is leadership and culture. Obviously, I don't want to spend time on it. Value and ethics, codes of conduct, extremely important. But we need to create a human relations culture that is inclusive and fair. How do you manage human resources within the enterprise? It's absolutely, absolutely critical. Ability of an organization then to respond to uncertainty. Uncertainty is going to be the name of the game. Balancing the top line with the bottom line. Are we sticking to the knitting? We're going all over the place. And effectiveness of internal control, which is, again, part of a culture. System, process, discipline. That's a part of our culture. So I think, finally, audit committees have to challenge managements. You cannot take what management gives you as given. And if you have to challenge management, you need insight, you need awareness, you need independence, and you need leadership at that level. So the qualities of people that you have in your audit committees must reflect these attributes. And I've had a number of experiences where, as chairman of the audit committee, I've taken on the chairman of the company. Okay, final slide. I leave you with one more. Woody Allen. Confidence is what you have before you understand the problem. And I think if Alan Greenspan had understood that, the world would have been saved a lot of problems. Thank you very much.